So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emma Paradise, and on behalf of Common Good Vermont, I want to thank you all for joining us today for Safeguarding Your Mission, Nonprofit Compliance. And this is the second session in an ongoing series that's designed to help nonprofits keep our organizations, staff, and communities protected in today's evolving legal landscape. And without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Connor Daly, who's representing our partners at the Nonprofit Legal Hub, to introduce the hub and today's presenters.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma. And I will be advancing the slides in a little bit, so I will be off camera during that. But I just wanted to welcome everybody. Yeah, as Emma mentioned, my name is Connor Daly. I'm joining you on behalf of the Vermont, Nonprofit Legal Hub. Um, we launched the hub because we know that Vermont's nonprofits are doing like such essential work in their communities every day, and that legal compliance for many organizations can feel like a little bit of a moving target, especially these days with everything. And so the hub exists to kind of reduce those barriers and make sure Vermont nonprofits um, have the guidance they need to protect, to stay protected and keep doing what they're doing. And I'm so excited, like, to have Jill Martin Diaz and Anthony Iarrapino today on behalf of us. We're so grateful that they volunteered their time to provide this great webinar. Today's session is titled Nonprofit Compliance, like legal requirements and best practices. And they're going to be covering a lot of ground, so I'll stop talking in a second. But by way of introduction quickly, and Anthony, Jill, please feel free to jump in. Jill Martin Diaz is the executive director of the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, and brings deep experience, navigating the legal and operational realities facing Vermont nonprofits. And Anthony Iarrapino is a practicing attorney with Wilschek. Is that right? Yep, Wilschek and Iarrapino Law Office, based in Montpelier. And so they will be speaking to the legal dimensions of compliance and risk management. And I'm so excited to have them, and I'll turn it over to them. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Connor. Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Connor. Hi, everyone. And hi, Anthony. It's good to be here with you.
Good to be with all of you. Yes, Anthony Arapino, he, him pronouns. Just say a little bit more about my bio so you get a sense of why I'm up here talking to you, not just because I'm a lawyer, but I am someone who advises nonprofits all across the scale spectrum, from those that are small enough to file a 1023 EZ with the IRS, meaning you have less than $50,000 a year in income and less than 250,000 in total assets, all the way up to multi-million dollar budgets. I've been a staff member of nonprofits. I've been an executive director of nonprofits, and I currently serve on the board of a nonprofit as an officer. So hoping to bring a little bit of balanced perspective for you here today, but just by way of saying, with many of you, I'm with you in terms of I've stood in your shoes, and had to navigate this from the other side, and very happy to be presenting with Jill, who is very much. This is not just a counseling or an academic exercise for Jill and their staff, but is lived experience on a daily basis.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. It's so great to be in the room with so many amazing folks and colleagues around our state. I definitely I joined the conversation today. Yes, from my experience as a lawyer, I've been trained, and now I can't ever unlawyer myself. I know that's how I move through the world. But I'm really also, on this panel, what I hope to highlight from my professional and lived experience is being a new ED. I'm a new executive director. And I'm a new executive director of a politicized program where we're really building our systems for the first time and aiming toward quite literally moving targets. And not only are we building our system toward moving targets to serve a politicized population and do politicized work, we're also led by politicized bodies. I'm a trans person. I'm a non-binary person. You literally I can't talk about myself or my work or my organization's work without violating a gaggle of executive orders from the Trump administration. And nevertheless, we persisted. So I'm here to bring a newcomer's perspective to the conversation and to relay to you all some lessons learned. Know that I am myopically focused on immigration law, and that has radically under-equipped me for nonprofit compliance law. So you'd think I have quite a leg up on this conversation being a lawyer, but I don't, and I've been learning alongside many of you. So know that if I can figure it out, you can figure it out too, and that's why we're here, and that's why we support the development of the Vermont Legal Hub. I know we're going to say a little bit about the hub at the end of the program, and Connor, anyone feel free to jump in. But the Vermont Legal Hub is a new initiative standing up in response to the lack of counsel here in our community for small nonprofits like ours that don't have a budget for getting outside legal counsel. And you know, I found myself really scrambling for advice on January 20th when I and my program became illegal, apparently. And I'm trying to make sense of what's what in this chaotic time, and also to be bold and brave and stand true to our missions. It's been a real challenge. I'm really excited that the Vermont Legal Hub is standing up to provide mobilization for lawyers like Anthony to do training and technical assistance and hopefully pro bono representation for nonprofits in our state. We have the highest per capita concentration of nonprofits in the country. And so we have a disparate proportion of organizations and service providers that are left vulnerable by this deliberate confusion the Trump administration's cultivated. So I'm grateful to be able to reflect on what I've learned and how we've prioritized decision making in resource constrained environments.
Great. Connor, maybe you can bring up the slides so we can start making our way through them, because there's a bunch. Oh. Okay. Looks like it's a little bit tricky formatting.
Is it a little tricky formatting? I'm happy to.
Well, that's just the title slide. So why don't we go ahead and move that along one? See what happens. All right, that's a little bit better. I want to thank Jill for their remarks and just say at the outset, we have a very ambitious agenda. The range of topics we're going to touch on is wide, and as a necessity for an hour, that means we're only going to skim the surface. But our goal today is empowerment. Knowledge is power, and we want to try to introduce you to some of these topics, hopefully demystify some of these topics that you might have heard about but had no idea what it meant, and does it pertain to your organization. And so we'll try to take as many questions as we can as we go, but remembering this is a general audience presentation, and the hub exists to try to help you get connected with resources to really drill down into your specific questions and, fact patterns and scenarios that may be things that your organization are confronting today or are worried about confronting in the future. So we'll try to get to as much as that as we can, but remember, we're going to stay very general with Vermont state nonprofit compliance, protecting nonprofit tax exempt status, recognizing that nonprofit organizations are both creatures of state law. You exist as corporations chartered by the state of Vermont or maybe another state, and you're doing business here as registered as a foreign nonprofit with the state of Vermont. So you've got one set of regulators and one set of laws to comply with at the state level. And then we're going to talk about protecting nonprofit tax exempt status, because that is a important aspect of organizational survival for many organizations, the subsidy that taxpayers provide for you to do your charitable and educational work. And then I don't remember what the other bullets were, but I think if we go if we can get that slide back, I think what it was meaning to say is we're going to take you through some checklists related to all of those compliance topics, and just give you an introduction of what it is you need to know, what it is you and your boards need to be thinking about as you navigate this landscape. And I want to say also, definitely echoing Jill's comments that the landscape has become more difficult to navigate thanks to the intentional confusion that the Trump administration has tried to sow with its various executive orders. But most of what's in this presentation today is evergreen. These are things that are going to be useful. They were useful before the Trump presidency. They will be useful, we hope, someday after a Trump presidency. But on this, one important thing to say too, lawyers have to say it, we're giving you these resources as educational resources. They're provided for informational purposes. We're not here to give you specific actionable legal advice for any of your organizations today. As I said, the hub exists to try and connect you with attorneys that can help you navigate more tricky situations if you're confronting them. But know that we're going at a high level today, and you should not rely on any third-party content that's in this presentation as well. There will be some links to content that was prepared by others. While we think it's useful information, we haven't vetted it fully. And so just word to the wise, buyer beware. We're going to give you good information, but if you need something more specific that you need to act on for your organization, best to get connected with a resource for a client, for attorney that can provide you that kind of direct assistance. But Jill mentioned executive orders at the top of the discussion, and I'm going to pass it back to Jill to take you through this topic area.
Thanks, Anthony. I can only imagine, and now that as an ED, I've been in the client seat, but I could imagine for folks who are completely outside the legal system that it must be hard to come to an educational session like this, and right away the lawyer educators who are here are like, and by the way, we're not your lawyers and this is not legal advice, but that's part of the strategy here, right? Like, the Trump administration has very deliberately, from day one, from January 20th, 2025, flooded the field with so much noise, some of which is arguably perhaps within the executive's power, hasn't been tested before, probably going to get challenged, but probably could prevail if a challenge in court. And other noise has just been noise, like could not withstand a legal challenge, hasn't withstood legal challenges, but it's a flood the field strategy where can they publish more ludicrous executive orders and policies faster than we can file a lawsuit to challenge them. And that's the strategy, right? Flood the field, we all get overwhelmed. And it was already true before 2025 that there were not enough lawyers in Vermont to meet the need. And the need in this room includes nonprofits' needs, right? Not just low-income litigants' needs, but nonprofits. Nonprofits lack the budget in many cases, including at my own organization, Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, to be hiring counsel. It's not something that we, our early funders wanted to see us getting some case numbers out, and we're only now in the position to think about how to make sure that we're preserving budget for outside counsel in our annual planning. And so they're counting on that, right? January 20th happens, and that first day, I'm looking at one of the many excellent executive order trackers that are available online. This one's by the law firm Mayer Brown, and I'm looking at the number of executive orders just from January 20th. And if you do a term search, DEI, transgender ideology, immigrant, refugee, it's like literally everything that I do, everything that I am, everything that my staff do, that my clients need, everything about who we are and what we do is suddenly illegal, question mark. So my first task as a leader was to try and, like, first of all, take care of my nervous system. I'm feeling activated. I'm feeling upset. I'm feeling worried. Everyone around me is upset and worried. Everyone around me is seeking my input as an immigration lawyer, not because this is immigration law. This is administrative policy, but it's immigration enough that, people are looking to us for some guidance. And the first thing I need to do is kind of ground myself. And then I need to think about, okay, what do I know? What are actual emergencies and what are feared emergencies? And then to lean on my community. Who else is in my community of practice, which includes all of you now, to help me make sense of the world. And once we slowed ourselves down a little bit, we saw a few things. One, our funding was pulled immediately. Federal funding, gone. That seems illegal under many principles of statutory and common law. Am I the right person to go file a lawsuit in court? Probably not. I don't know how to do that. Well, now I do, but I didn't back then. We saw that a lot of the executive policies that were contained in the first slew of executive orders, which have just continued to come at us every week, usually on Fridays, just so we can stew on them all weekend. They seem to contravene well-settled evergreen law, as Anthony put it. And is that possible? Once we slowed ourselves down and we thought, okay, our funding's pulled, we're going to be transparent with the community about that so that they know not to, count on our services if we can't replace the funding. And then once we slowed ourselves down to say, wait, I don't think that it's actually legal that these executive orders suddenly reversed well-settled law or reneged contracts around funding, federal funding for community programs. We then thought, okay, this is their strategy. They're deliberately trying to distract us from being able to do our day-to-day work. And it's probably more likely that they are counting on us to become so distracted with trying to make sense of this dog's breakfast of executive ordering that we fall short of what we know is our bread and butter compliance punch list. Right? It's really easy to get distracted by the feeling of crisis that has been created by this culture of executive order issuing by the Trump administration. The thing that you should look at, if you're looking at an executive order tracker online, you should complement that with a quick look at litigation challenging executive orders. This has been the most challenged administration in the federal judiciary in the history of the United States. And what that means is there are people out there who are doing the litigation work. It's not me personally. And so how do I make sense of this moment and not let myself get distracted away from my general punch list of bread and butter compliance? I have to resist taking the bait every time. And I have to tell you, it is like a weekly practice, right, of figuring out what's going on with the executive orders, what's going on with policy, how much of that policy is passed legally, what does it mean for me, and then really practicing tuning it out. And that's why I've leaned in so hard to this community of practice at Common Good Vermont. That's why I've subscribed to the National Council of Nonprofits, NCN. I receive their emails as a member so that if they win any litigation victories, I would benefit as a class member. Vermont Asylum Assistance Project would. And I kind of leave it to the experts, right? I leave it to the experts to give me technical assistance. I make sure I'm dialed in to those secondary sources. And every single week, I remind myself to not take the bait. Every new executive order is exactly designed to make me lose sight of my core work, and that includes staying compliant. It's much more likely that I'm going to get audited by the IRS for tax compliance than I am to experience an ICE officer trying to bust down our office door. So that's how I come to you today, to say, the Trump administration is doing this. This is what they're doing. If you're feeling bad, that is by design. And collectively, as long as we keep ourselves focused on what we know to be true, those evergreen laws, then we already have the information we need here in this room to keep each other safe.
Yeah, that's so well said, Jill. If you want to advance the slide, Connor, I think we'll see an example of one of the trackers that Jill was referencing, this one from the National Council of Nonprofits, the link down there at the bottom. The slides will be shared or I think available. I think Common Good Vermont and the Legal Hub is collecting a library of resources like this to help you, help you stay up to speed. And I want to just underscore, definitely couldn't agree more that there's a lot of sound and fury with some of these executive orders, but a lot of them mean nothing. So they get a big headline that makes you maybe feel like something is changing dramatically in the substantive policy area that you exist in. But really, when you get to the end of the executive order, it says something like, "And I order the Attorney General to investigate this within 90 days." But what does that mean? What is it going to happen? Like, again, there's a lot of fear tactic in there. There is also, however, a reality that many groups have seen that some of these do have teeth, and particularly the ones that attack funding streams. I was hired by a number of nonprofits before the election to assess the risk of funding being pulled back that was actually dedicated to them through earmarks. And I looked at the law and I was like, there's no way this is going to happen. The only way they can really do this is if they show that there's some fraud, waste, and abuse in your program. And little did we know that is going to be, some of the Trump administration's three favorite words in this time is fraud, waste, and abuse, because those are very nebulous standards that allow them to question and attack and assert without saying, we just don't like what it is you do or who it is you are and what it is you stand for. And so to Jill's point and my point before, like a lot of what we're trying to help you avoid is any kind of world in which they can look at your program and say there's fraud, waste, and abuse in how you're maybe using some of the federal money that you're receiving. So, Connor, do you want to move us along, please? Jill, is there anything you want to say in this slide? Or you've said a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just offer as a case study for what's happened in Vermont, it's been interesting to lead Vermont Asylum Assistance Project in this moment because there was nowhere to hide, right? It was never a prospective question of when the Trump administration comes looking for us, or when the executive orders hit home, or when these challenges hit home. I mean, I'm glad Anthony underscores the real teeth, the real impact that these policies, even if they're not defendable, even the ones that are not defendable in court, have on us at the front lines, because it did mean that right away we have the contract to guarantee immigration counsel for youth under 18 who are facing removal proceedings for the state of Vermont. Each state has one, and we're the contractor for Vermont. And that funding was pulled immediately. And then we don't have cash flow. We're a new organization. We didn't have money to make payroll. And then we had cases that all were switched. I had to furlough staff and then take all their cases. But I also am I have my own full-time docket. It was mayhem. And it was scary for the clients. It was scary for the prospective clients who wanted to know that they could rely on us to be in their corner if ICE came. And then we've become an organizational plaintiff in a multi-state lawsuit in the Ninth Circuit in California. And now we're devoting considerable resources to the work of being a client, being an impact plaintiff. And then we had to hope that we're going to get our money reinstated, but go out and replace the money so that we could then resume services. And then, while providing immigration law technical assistance to our colleagues here in Vermont. And it is a lot to hold, and I definitely don't want to make light of the very, very real impact that these policies have on us. But I think Anthony's point really resonates for me. I do think a lot about, as a new nonprofit leader, okay, well, what's in my sphere of control? I'm not the one who's going to go take the executive order to court. That's not my bag. What I can do is make sure that I am compliant, that I'm working toward remediation plans for any areas where I'm out of compliance, and that I'm leaning on my community of practice so that I don't ever forget, I'm not alone.
That's great, Jill. That's perspective. That's what we all need to keep a handle on. And this next slide here, I think, is examples of legal support that the hub, the newly established nonprofit legal hub, is hoping to assist members and of the Vermont nonprofit community with. Jill, do you want to, as a founding board member of the legal hub, do you want to say a little bit about these?
Sure. So some of the co-founders of the Legal Hub Board, we got together to talk about my perspective as a pro bono mobilizer, Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, before we had an incredible team of staff attorneys who you all helped make possible. We relied on volunteer attorneys from the private bar like Anthony to volunteer with us to deliver our services under our supervision. That's how we could leverage my one attorney hour to be able to serve multiple clients. And this was a model that the Legal Hub was interested in. How do we leverage potential volunteers here in Vermont to meet needs? And then we came up with a list of all the things that I wish I had counsel on when we were growing VAP up over the last 2.5 years. I, an attorney, had all of these questions about how I was structuring my bylaws, how I was structuring my operations and policy manuals, how we were communicating about ourselves online, how we were communicating about ourselves with potential funders, existing funders, how are we pivoting, what were we doing in response to any executive orders with respect to our governance, our documentation. And what you see on this slide is a list of questions I had. And of course, I was just one of the people that the hub leadership were consulting with. But these are things I wish I had counsel for. And we ended up going through a national competition through an international law firm to get matched with a pro bono lawyer who now we have pro bono general counsel at ORIC. But it took about 6 months of competition to be able to win a coveted spot in that technical assistance program for immigration nonprofits around the U.S. And it strikes me, like, wouldn't it have been cool if I had known how to get in touch with the hub so that the hub can get in touch with Anthony so that Anthony and I could just kick it?
Great. Yeah, thanks for that. And thanks for the work that you and so many of others have done to bring the hub into, existence. Let's dig in now to some of the meat of our presentation. If you want to go ahead with us, Connor. Okay, so we talked about before your Vermont nonprofit. Like, what are the things you should have been doing before the administration changed? What are the things you should be doing now? And what are the things you should be doing well into the future? And we've got a couple of several big categories up here that we're going to drill down to in more detail. But starting from, coming into existence and making sure that the Secretary of State's office knows that you still exist and you want to stay in compliance with Vermont law and be a going concern for years to come. Your financial reporting, in some cases to the state, but certainly annually to the IRS. Governance and board responsibilities. Hopefully you have good people helping you. You're not in this alone. You've got a volunteer board that understands what their responsibilities are and has rolled up their sleeve to fulfill those. Federal compliance issues, that can expose you to risk of losing your nonprofit or your tax exempt status. They can't take away your nonprofit status, but they can take away your tax exemption, which makes life very difficult if you've come into non-compliance. How do you stay up on top of record keeping and make sure that you're being transparent with the public where you need to be when you're getting a taxpayer subsidy to stay in business? How are you keeping an eye out for fraud prevention, making sure that, there's a unfortunately sad joke that embezzlement is the state crime of Vermont. It is a very frequently practiced crime in organizations where there may be trusted individuals and people who are such important parts of the team, and everyone likes them and trusts them, and nobody looks over their shoulders. And then you find out 5 years later, oh, that's where that huge budget hole came from. Somebody was padding their own personal finances through unfortunately, through the budget of the nonprofit. So that's a big thing. And then we'll look at some other additional best practices. That's kind of the roadmap of where we're heading. Now, most of the folks on here, I assume, are working with existing nonprofits. So you've already incorporated in some way with the state of Vermont, you're registered with the Secretary of State, and you're getting somebody who's registered with the Secretary of State is getting email reminders every January that you're supposed to file an annual report. And this is a question that I've gotten from so many clients that I really just want to put it out there. I cannot stress how easy it is to file your annual report. Your information is in an online system at the Secretary of State's office. Usually it is a one-click thing that you can do yourself. And if you have trouble doing it, you do not need to call a lawyer. You should call the free resource paid for with your tax dollars at the Secretary of State's Business Services Office. I cannot stress enough that our Secretary of State's office, though they are part of the regulatory system to help nonprofits come into existence and stay in compliance, they're not there to play gotcha. They're there to help you stay on track. And your tax dollars pay for somebody to be at the business services during business hours, Monday through Friday. They're very friendly. They take questions. And so most simple questions with, hey, have I filed the right paperwork to keep my records up to date with the Secretary of State, or I need to change my paperwork because something significant in our organization has changed. Maybe board members or personnel have changed. Some information that we've reported to the Secretary of State is no longer accurate, our address. They're there to help. It's a free resource. Remember that. When it comes to the Vermont Attorney General's office, they are also regulators of nonprofit organizations, but we have a pretty light touch regulatory program for the Vermont Attorney General's office in our state. And it really has most to do with folks that are using paid fundraisers to solicit charitable contributions. So you're running a fundraiser. You're paying a third-party entity to do it. Like, you don't have the fundraising staff in-house to run a phone bank to raise money for your annual funds or to, do email or mail solicitations. So you pay somebody to do it. If that is something that your organization is either contemplating doing or engaged in doing, then you need to know that there is a registration process with the Vermont Attorney General's office. I'm not going to go into great detail about that now, but just know that on the Vermont Attorney General's website, there's a great page about paid charitable fundraisers and other resources for charities. And so know that's an issue that you need to run to ground with compliance. And in fact, there are other states that are even more stringent when it comes to soliciting charitable contributions and registering. In Vermont, as I said, it's really mainly if you're paying someone to raise money for you, particularly if they get a cut. But in other states, if you're soliciting any money from the public as a charity, you need to be registered with the Attorney General's office. And so that's the kind of thing, again, depending on how wide you're casting your charitable solicitations net, you can usually call free to the Attorney General or the Secretary of State in the states where you're receiving major contributions from and say, hey, this is something we're doing. Are we supposed to be registered somehow? Can you help me get registered? Because again, at least at the state level, most of what you're going to find is people who want to help you comply rather than play gotcha. Jill, did you have anything you wanted to add before we move on?
I was just thinking about things I've learned in bringing myself into compliance with these different registration requirements. So in case folks are also looking for like very practical practical tips of the trade. Definitely redundancy in your organization is key. I am doing my best compliant work on behalf of the org when it's not just me, when it's written down in a place where my colleagues have access, where I've saved local records and not just relied on being able to log in to the Secretary of State and download my history on demand. We keep our own records. Making sure that there are a few folks, that the deadlines and the requirements live outside of me, my head, my to-do list, my calendar. And I've learned the hard way. I'm happy to reveal that I found out after the wonderful Devin Ayers joined us as our first operations director that I was not registering for lobbying correctly. And we were actually penalized by the state and needed to come into compliance. And so that's scary, especially when you're lobbying about transgenderism and immigration. And so I was, the point was to make a plan, build some redundancy so it doesn't happen again, and remediate as quickly as you can.
That's a great point, and I think it will apply to all of the substantive sort of compliance obligations that we're going through here. Teamwork makes the dream work, and it's a lot to just, when I do trainings for organizations, I like to say that you're trying to build a compliance culture rather than just have one person whose job it is to do compliance. And however that looks different ways in different organizations, but really want to lift up what Jill said about redundancy, making sure that you're not just, I've had clients, for example, who had an executive director leave and their address was still on file with the Secretary of State's office and no one was checking the old address. And lo and behold, they hadn't filed an annual report. And so they were their whole corporate existence was administratively terminated by the Secretary of State, all because no one was checking an email. Luckily, it's easy in Vermont to bring a corporation that's been administratively terminated back to life. But it's just an anecdote to sort of underscore what Jill was saying about make sure it's written down and make sure it's written down in a place where more than one person in the organization knows what it is and understands how to stay up to date on that. I'm going to quickly run through sales tax exemption. If you are federally exempt from income tax as a charitable organization, then you may be able to make a number of purchases in the state of Vermont without paying the state sales tax. But in order to get a state sales tax exemption, you need to file with the tax department. The form is called S3. There's a similar thing that I will say is that if you have questions about that, there are helpful and friendly people at the tax department to help you with that. The next concept that's mentioned here is unrelated business income. And I could teach an entire nonprofit law class on this. So I'm going to go at a very high level and give you what is perhaps the most classic example. Your nonprofits all exist for what's called an exempt purpose. Like, why are you a charity or an educational institution to begin with? You're serving a population. Maybe you're a museum, for example, and your goal then, your charitable mission is to educate people about science. But you have a gift shop that is unrelated to your mission. It sells some things that are educational, but some things that are just purely, this is an extra revenue stream for our organization. And yes, we put the money into the profitable or the nonprofit charitable mission, but yes, it's not actually what our mission is. It's just a way to generate some extra money. Or we have a big event space in our museum. And when we're not, holding lectures on a scientific topic, we let people come in there and use it for a wedding. Like, obviously that's not necessarily being a wedding venue is not why you are tax exempt. Being a science museum is why you're tax exempt. So the whole idea is just to keep your eyes peeled for something that looks a little different from your day-to-day mission. If you're doing it to raise funds, but you have for-profit competitors out there. There are other people in the wedding, venue business. There are other people in the selling toys and puzzles and keychains business. If you're doing that in addition to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis for your exempt purpose, your charitable or education purpose, you might have an unrelated business income tax issue that does not disqualify you from being a nonprofit that's tax exempt, but it may mean that you have to pay some extra income taxes, and that's something you should be looking at and budgeting for. So if you have some entrepreneurial folks and some need for additional revenue and people are cooking up all these exciting ideas, that's great. Not trying to say don't do it, but trying to say know that there's this concept out there called unrelated business income tax, and you might want to talk to somebody before you go forward with some of those fundraising ideas, because you might have to just budget, make sure that you're tracking that income correctly and reporting it correctly. And so that's all I'm going to say about that for now. Just know it's a concept that's out there and that you might want to follow up if this is something that sounds like it might apply to you. Financial reporting requirements. This one too, the big one here that I'm just going to jump out with is the Form 990s. This is your informational tax return. Yes, you do not have to pay income tax as a nonprofit, tax exempt 501c3 organization, or 501c4 or other Cs, but you do have to file an informational review that lets the public know what it is that they're getting for their tax subsidy, for you not paying income tax, what it is that you're doing for the greater good. And these are, as Jill just said in the chat, these are public documents. So when you fill them out, know that they will be consumed by a public audience, and they are things that you have to provide to members of the public upon request. They're due when regular taxes are due. It's very often the case that extensions can and will be granted. But I'm assuming most of you have been through the 990 process. But I would want to say that in this new environment, probably there are people taking care about word choice that they didn't perhaps used to take care of when filling out their 990s. And I don't know if Jill had anything that they wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think this is something Anthony and I talked about in prep. My take on whether or not to preemptively comply with new policy that seems on its face like, how can that be legal? We have protected speech as a constitutional core value. How can it be that I can't use certain words on my website? Well, there's going to be lots of litigation about that. And many experts agree that there's only so much that an executive could do to penalize a nonprofit because of the words we use to describe ourselves or our staff or our work, or whatever. And every organization will have its own barometer for the trade-offs, the costs and benefits of using certain language, of whether to prioritize resources to make a quick pivot in response to new policy, or whether to kind of hold the line and wait to see what happens in litigation. At VAP, we haven't been able to hide, there's nowhere for us to hide. And so we decided not to amend any of our language. We're also, because of the nature of our work, we're always in active litigation against the Trump administration. Like, we file new lawsuits every week. So what I'll say is, we're still here and we're good. And, I have totally, every organization needs to figure out what it feels true for you and what feels right for your mission. And for us, our mission alignment meant being bold and not shying away. But certainly, I've definitely been part of a lot of conversation where folks think, okay, how should we talk differently about the work that we do? And my take has been in those spaces, I think what matters more than the words that we say is the things that we do for each other as a community. So hopefully, all of you on this call are here, we're thankful for your solidarity with non-citizen and trans communities here.
Yeah, here to that. And just also do underscore that risk tolerance is an organizational decision that, be bold, but, everybody's definition of bold can be a little bit different, because if you're doing great work in your mission and you feel like the best thing you can do is keep your head down and keep doing that great work in your mission, that's fine too. And there are ways to still be true to your mission, but also not attract unnecessary or unwanted attention. I'm just trying to keep track of the chat here, because this is amazing chat. And somebody mentioned the 990N postcard. Yes, that is a thing. For lower income, smaller amounts of income, there is an easy 990 form to file. You can do that. I want to also underscore what Andy Robinson said about a lot of earned revenue for nonprofits is mission related and is not considered carrying on a trade or business. So don't feel like everything you do to earn income, like you now have to go reevaluate because I told you that there's this thing about unrelated business income tax. Like, emphasis is on the unrelated. And so as Andy says, if you're unsure, talk with your attorney or try and get connected with some through the hub. Looking at time, we're going to have to just jump to that next slide. This is really important stuff about governance and board responsibilities, and hopefully you all have got great folks who've been willing to volunteer their time to be on your board. You need at least 3 of them in Vermont, and the majority of whom they have to be disinterested, meaning not earning any money from the nonprofit, either as an employee or as a service provider or as a landlord. Doesn't mean you can't have people who are on your board who in some way do business with your board. And of course, there are going to be conflict of interest, compliance issues that you want to think through there. But it does mean that the majority of your board needs to be disinterested. You should hopefully have a manageable board so that getting a quorum is something that you can do without too much struggle and difficulty, but you have a diversity of perspectives and experiences there. And you have people who are willing to step up to play officer roles. You do need to have a chair and a treasurer and a secretary. And now I can't remember, but some people can play dual roles. I don't advise it, but I'm pretty sure the chair cannot also be the secretary. I always have to look that one up. But best practice, of course, is to have different persons playing different officer roles. You've got to meet at least once annually. And boy, I think you'd be hard pressed to succeed if you weren't meeting at least quarterly with your board, making sure that you have the benefit of their expertise and their input, but also the benefit of their oversight. You got to be keeping board minutes. And there's a lot of misperceptions about what board minutes are. They are not transcripts of meetings. There are some organizations that like to do that, write down every word that everyone says at the meeting. And that's wonderful. If somebody isn't at the previous meeting, they can really get a flavor for who said what. But really, the bare minimum, what you need to do is make sure that you're keeping track of who's present, what was the agenda, what at a high level was discussed, and what was voted on. Those are key things for the board minutes, financial records, including board-approved budgets, conflict of interest disclosures. If you do have somebody who's doing business with the nonprofit, is that something that's discussed by the board before the decision goes forward to make sure that you're getting a fair deal from the board member who does have a financial interest in the transaction you're doing? That is an area that is of great interest to the IRS, I will tell you. So make sure that you've adopted a conflict of interest policy. You would have had to have done that at the time you got your tax exempt status, but a lot of people adopt it and then it's a document that just collects dust. Well, that needs to be a living document that's looked at, reaffirmed every year within your organization. And the best practice is to make sure that each year, each board member is filling out a conflict of interest form and that they're signing it, saying, yes, this is still accurate or this is new information. And I understand that we live under this conflict of interest policy and I will abide by it. And then executive compensation, as well as compensation that's being paid to anyone. You want to make sure that people are being paid fairly for the work they do, but not excessively in relation to actual work performed. And there are a number of IRS tests, which I won't drill down into for sake of time here. But you do want to make sure that your board is looking over that. There's, the executive director, if you have one, manages all your employees, but they often say the executive director is the employee of the board. And so you have to really make sure that the board is looking into what's happening and whether and how effectively you're compensating your executive leader. So I think we can go to the next one, Connor, and I'll just, with time pressing on, I'm just going to look at Jill's microphone, and when they unmute, I will step back, but if they don't unmute, I'm going to keep charging ahead. Okay, this is really important, and if this is the last slide we get to, that's okay, because it's very important in terms of the nonprofit tax-exempt status. Restrictions on tax-exempt organizations. The big one is political campaign involvement, and that mainly is for C3s, but even with C4s, you have to be tracking that very carefully. Excess benefit transactions, again, where that is a situation where you've got the organization is spending money to buy a good or service from somebody, and they're spending way more money than that good or service is worth if they were to just buy it from a different source. That's basically a risk of where you're, essentially taking the tax-free money and giving a benefit that goes way beyond the benefit that the organization is receiving back. So that's an important thing to look at in contracting, both for services and for goods. Making all your required filings. We talked about 990s before. We talked about staying in good standing for incorporation. State and local compliance. That's something that Jill mentioned before. Lobbying is a great example, and there are IRS compliance dimensions to lobbying, as well as state of Vermont compliance and reporting when it comes to lobbying. So that's another thing you need to be aware of and know about. So let's go on to the slide to see if we can get some detail in before we run out the clock here. We've talked about excess benefit a little bit. We've also talked about if you're a 501c3, can you lobby? Yes. Can you talk to the legislature about bills that affect your mission and the populations you serve and the things that you're interested in? Yes, you can, but you have limits on how much you can do, and you need to keep track of that for your 990, and you need to keep track of that to make sure that you're not exceeding your annual limits on the type and amount of lobbying that you do, because that puts you at risk of having to pay excise taxes to the IRS and or potentially losing your tax-exempt status. So anything to do with legislation at the federal level, at the state level, or even if you're trying to get involved with public questions, constitutional amendments, things of that nature, you want to take a position on those and let the world know what your position is. That is lobbying. And you may need to register with the state, and you definitely need to keep track of it for the IRS. If you are getting involved, if you're not a C3, because C3 should never be taking partisan stances in candidate elections. But there are some things you can do, like get out the vote. But if you are one of the 501c organizations that can be involved in political electioneering, that's an area where you definitely want to get some compliance counseling, because there's state law overlay as well as federal restrictions, and you may have to do some additional types of registration. And then last but not least, avoid illegal activities. Now, as Jill alluded to, there's a lot of efforts out there to make you believe that certain things that nonprofits have done and will continue to do, we hope, are illegal. But like, we're talking about more obvious stuff here, like don't let anyone in your nonprofit sell drugs out of the office. Like the bite you in the nose illegal stuff, not the stuff that is protected First Amendment activity that the certain people in the government want you to believe is illegal. See, we're getting low on time, so let's see what the next slide holds for us. Yep, political activity. We covered that. If you're a 501c3 and you're getting anywhere near the election, that is an area where you want to seek some specific counseling. If you're doing lobbying at all, there's something called the 501H election. It's an easy form to file with the IRS. There's really good instructions online, but this election is very powerful. It makes your record keeping with regard to how much lobbying you can do very straightforward. It gives you a very firm number on how much you can spend on lobbying every year without running afoul of the IRS. So I see Connor is back on the screen, and I see we're running real short on time, but we're not running short on slides. So Connor, how do you want to wrap us up from here?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to, well, one, I want to say thank you very much to you both for like this great conversation, and thank you for everybody for attending and like the great chat, like content. It's awesome. Yes, we are short on time, so I was just going to do a little wrap, if that's okay, unless Jill, Anthony, you wanted to mention anything in particular before we wrap. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for this. This is so wonderful. We will be sharing, I think, the recording and the slides with folks. We are so grateful to Common Good Vermont, to Anthony and Jill, and especially also like the Vermont Professionals of Color. Weiwei, thank you so much for helping us even just get to this point and think about what is valuable for nonprofits that are facing so much these days. As you know, folks have mentioned, the Legal Hub, it is a nascent effort still, and we are slowly but surely like building a resource library and thinking about how to connect nonprofits with actual counsel. So in a second, I'll flip it over to Emma from Common Good Vermont. But I just wanted to say thank you so much to Anthony and Jill again. And as we will continue to like build this effort, please feel free. We are working on the website, but info@nonprofitlegalhub.org if you have any questions. It's live, and feel free to reach out to us and connect with us. We want feedback. So with this seminar, with this webinar, with anything else that we're doing, please, we'd love to know what could be of value to you as a nonprofit leader or a board member or a volunteer. We are very much kind of building the plane as we're flying, and yeah, would just love that feedback. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here. And without further ado, I'll flip it over to Emma.
Thanks, Connor, and thank you to our presenters. Just want to echo deep appreciation for everyone who made today's session possible. And yes, there will be more coming, so please do share your feedback on the survey. I dropped it in the chat, and we'll follow up with the recording and today's slides in an email along with that survey link. So thank you, everyone, for coming out, and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Common Good. Thank you, Anthony. Bye, folks.